Racist female cop disrespect. Black judge, what happened next? Shock. Everyone, in a system meant to uphold fairness and justice, prejudice can lurk in the shadows, ready to strike at the most unexpected moments. Meet Officer Wendy Holcroft, a seasoned cop with a hidden streak of racism that's about to cost her dearly. During what she believes to be a routine courtroom appearance, Wendy crosses paths with Judge Althea Warren, a brilliant and resolute black woman famed for her no-nonsense approach to the law. Offended by the judge's firm stance and quietly resentful of her authority, Wendy unleashes a scornful disrespect, only to discover she's provoked a force far greater than she imagined. In the days ahead, her casual bigotry will spiral into a reckoning of shocking proportions. Built in the early 20th century, the Midtown Justice Complex is a majestic courthouse with limestone columns and polished marble floors. It has a way of making even the most self-assured people feel small. On a cool autumn morning, Officer Wendy Holcroft arrived at its imposing entrance. Dressed in her NYPD uniform, she walked with quick strides, her expression a tight mask of impatience. Inside, the halls buzzed with the usual hustle lawyers, flipping through files, defendants murmuring with family, and officers exchanging polite nods. Wendy approached an information desk to confirm the courtroom for a minor hearing in which she'd testify. She only half listened as the clerk gave directions, already scanning the corridor for her assigned space. At that moment, Judge Althea Warren exited her chambers, a tall figure with regal bearing in her black robe. She moved gracefully, weaving through the crowd. Judge Warren was relatively new to the city bench, but had earned a stellar reputation for her incisive mind and unwavering integrity. People whispered that she could read a defendant's intentions from a single glance. Wendy glimpsed the judge out of the corner of her eye, but didn't pay special attention, just another official, she thought. However, as fate would have it, this was the very judge presiding over her hearing. And unbeknownst to Wendy, this judge's decisions would soon shape the trajectory of her life in ways she could never predict. It was Wendy's second year at the 14th Precinct, and she prided herself on her track record of arrests. To her, policing was a straightforward job. Identify wrongdoing, enforce the law, move on. She saw little room for nuance or empathy, especially for those she considered repeat offenders or problem communities. Her friends teased that she was strict, but some colleagues whispered about her attitude when dealing with Black or Latino suspects. Wendy scoffed at the notion. Racism was an ugly word, and she refused to wear that label. As she reached the assigned courtroom, Wendy noticed a group of defense attorneys exchanging cordial greetings with Judge Warren. Something about the judge's calm authority made Wendy bristle. She disliked the effect such a figure had on the room. Everyone seemed to lean in when Judge Warren spoke, as if her words carried extraordinary weight. Taking a seat to wait for her case to be called, Wendy glanced at the judge's bench and felt a flicker of something akin to resentment. What's so special about her? She thought, tapping her foot against the polished floor. She's not going to intimidate me. In this moment, the courthouse was just a routine stop on Wendy's daily list of tasks. Little did she know that the woman wearing the judicial robe would trigger a chain of events that would test her prejudices, unravel her sense of power, and ultimately define her entire future. Althea Warren had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, where her parents instilled in her an unshakable belief in education and perseverance. She excelled in school, eventually securing scholarships to attend Howard University and later Columbia Law School. Her mind was sharp, her discipline fierce. By her late 20s, She was an assistant district attorney tackling cases that others found too complex or too politically sensitive. However, after witnessing systemic inequities and feeling the constraints of political pressures, Althea shifted her path. She became a defense attorney at the widely respected firm Langan & Byrne, representing people who rarely had a fair shot against the system. Over time, her track record of fair but determined advocacy caught the attention of local bar associations and progressive city officials. Encouraged by mentors, she ran for an open judicial seat in Manhattan against stiff competition, and won. Now in her mid-40s, Judge Althea Warren carried herself with a blend of warmth and steeled confidence that came from years in the courtroom trenches. She believed in justice with compassion, a stance that often earned her praise, but also scorn from those who preferred a more tough-on-crime approach. Yet the haters never shook her conviction that the law could be both firm and humane. Her chamber at the Midtown Justice Complex was a testament to her roots. Photographs of her parents, siblings, and a well-worn copy of Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings" sat on a wooden shelf next to volumes of legal reference. One wall featured framed newspaper articles about her biggest cases, both wins and losses, each teaching her a lesson about the delicate balance between accountability and mercy. Though she maintained a calm exterior, Althea was aware of the silent skepticism that sometimes met her in court. She saw the flicker of doubt in older attorneys' eyes, the micro-expressions from certain cops when they noticed a black woman on the bench. Some tried to test her boundaries with subtle disrespect, late filings, eye rolls, or sly attempts to question her knowledge of the law. She handled it all with dignity, rarely letting annoyance show. In the morning's docket, Althea had a variety of proceedings: bail hearings, minor infractions, and follow-ups on prior convictions. She scanned the schedule, noticing one case that seemed straightforward: a petty theft charge involving an unemployed teenager. The arresting officer was listed as Wendy Holcroft. Althea didn't recognize the name, so she filed the mental note away. As she entered the courtroom that day, she spotted a uniformed officer with a guarded posture, likely Holcroft. There was no immediate confrontation, just a fleeting exchange of glances. Althea greeted counsel from both sides, then took her seat behind the elevated bench, tapping her gavel lightly to commence the session. If only all goes smoothly, she thought. She had no premonition that this routine hearing would soon shatter any illusions of normalcy. Nor did she anticipate the wave of conflict that would pit her unyielding principles against a cop whose underlying biases were about to erupt in the most public and startling manner. When Officer Wendy Holcroft was 14, she attended a suburban high school in upstate New York, where the student body was overwhelmingly white. She'd grown up internalizing her family's casual remarks about outsiders and dangerous neighborhoods. Her father, a truck driver, frequently ranted about crime in those parts of the city, conflating poverty with violence and certain ethnicities with lawlessness. Wendy learned early on to mask her prejudices as common sense or experience. Her teenage years shaped her worldview, a place of us versus them, where certain lines shouldn't be crossed. She'd avoided kids from the city or those who were different in ways that threatened her comfort zone. That bubble rarely burst, even as she ventured into the world of policing. On the surface, she looked like any other officer aspiring to serve the public. But beneath the uniform lurked the biases that had been stoked at home. At the police academy, Wendy excelled physically. She was strong, agile, and shot with deadly accuracy at the range. What she lacked was empathy. Her instructors noted her quickness to escalate tensions during training simulations. She didn't see it that way. She believed she was taking control in a dangerous job. Superiors largely shrugged it off, chalking it up to a strong sense of discipline. They needed officers who wouldn't hesitate in the line of duty. However, a year into her assignment at the 14th Precinct, Wendy's approach started raising quiet red flags among some colleagues. While no formal complaints were filed, murmurs circulated about her interactions in predominantly Black or Hispanic neighborhoods. She was known to be abrupt, sometimes borderline antagonistic, during traffic stops or calls for domestic disturbances. People suspected racism, but lacked enough conclusive evidence to challenge her directly. Away from her precinct, Wendy had few close friends. She preferred hanging out with a small clique of ex-military cops who joked about political correctness and soft judges. They'd gather at a bar near Lexington Avenue, trading war stories and venting frustrations about the criminals they saw daily. In that environment, Wendy felt secure enough to let slip the occasional racially charged remark. Nothing blatant, but coded references that her circle understood. She did so with little pushback. Now, as she sat in the Midtown courtroom, waiting for a minor hearing involving a teenager, she'd arrested Wendy forced herself to appear calm. A twinge of restlessness knotted her stomach. Perhaps it was the imposing architecture, or the knowledge that some judges could cross-examine an officer's methods. She disliked feeling scrutinized. In the back of her mind, she clung to the assumption that a tough approach was necessary to maintain law and order. She had no inkling that soon the veneer shielding her deeply rooted biases would shatter. Nor did she anticipate that Judge Althea Warren would be the catalyst, forcing Wendy to confront aspects of herself she had long kept hidden, even from her own conscience. The docket progressed steadily that morning. Minor cases zipped by with Judge Warren dispensing decisions, some lenient, others stern, always balanced by her quest for fairness. She'd addressed a bail revision for a college student caught shoplifting, lecturing them about turning their life around, followed by a stern warning to a repeat drunk driver whose license was provisionally suspended. Then came the petty theft charge involving a 17-year-old named Miles Hendricks. Miles had allegedly stolen a pair of sneakers from a sports store. He had no prior record, and the public defender argued Miles had a stable home environment. The family was present, anxiously seated in the gallery. Officer Wendy Holcroft stepped forward to testify, her posture rigid. Judge Warren studied Wendy's face, noticing the tight-lipped expression that bordered on contempt. The defense asked the officer basic questions about the arrest, the time, the store's location, her reasons for not issuing a summons instead of a formal arrest. Wendy's replies were curt, slightly brusque. Tension rippled through the courtroom. The public defender persisted. Officer Holcroft, is it typical for you to arrest a minor for shoplifting goods valued under $50? Wendy bristled. It's well within my discretion, she said sharply, voice echoing in the near-silent room. She threw a sidelong glance at Judge Warren, as if daring her to intervene. Judge Warren cleared her throat. Officer, please maintain a respectful tone. Counsel is performing due diligence. Continue, Ms. Shepherd. She addressed the defense attorney calmly, but Wendy's eyes flashed. An unspoken resentment simmered beneath the surface. She loathed feeling like her judgment was being questioned. Your Honor, Wendy interjected, this was not a minor matter. The suspect resisted. He deserved to be processed, not coddled. Judge Warren calmly looked over her notes. The file shows no mention of active resistance, only the store's call for assistance. Are you certain there was physical or verbal resistance? Wendy stiffened, realizing she might have overreached. He was non-compliant, she asserted, though her voice wavered slightly. That's when the misstep happened. Judge Warren asked Wendy to clarify the timeline. The officer provided contradictory details, mixing up the order of events. Sensing a discrepancy, the defense attorney questioned Wendy further. Under increasing pressure, Wendy's frustrations boiled over. She cut off the attorney's question mid-sentence, snapping, "Look, you people always try to twist the facts. I know exactly what I saw." Instantly, a stunned hush fell. "You people?" Judge Warren repeated her tone, icy eyes narrowed. Everyone in the courtroom realized the coded phrase particularly offensive when directed at a black defense attorney, and possibly the judge herself. For a moment, it felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. Red creeping up her neck. Wendy tried to backtrack. "I meant lawyers. These defense lawyers always twisting things." But the damage was done. Judge Warren's jaw set, and the tension in the spectator seats heightened. Althea Warren leveled a steady gaze at Wendy. "Officer, I will not tolerate disrespect in my courtroom. Step back and moderate your language," she commanded, voice calm, yet razor-sharp. For a split second, Wendy's face contorted with indignation. She stared at Judge Warren, fury dancing in her eyes. Then, in a moment that left the entire courtroom stunned, Wendy rolled her eyes. Her sneer was subtle but defiant, directed squarely at the judge on the bench. A hush. No one dared speak. The unspoken question lingered. Did she really just do that in open court? Roll her eyes at the presiding judge? The shock would only intensify with each passing hour as Wendy's contemptuous gesture toward a black judge spread like wildfire through the city's legal circles and eventually the media. News of the incident spread at lightning speed, fed by the digital grapevine of text messages, social media, and scandalized attorneys exchanging notes over coffee. By afternoon, more than a few emails and phone calls had reached the desks of administrative staff in the district's chief judge's office, as well as the mayor's aides. A police officer had blatantly disrespected a presiding judge, who happened to be a black woman known for her fairness. The optics were terrible, and the implications suggested an undercurrent of bigotry. City Hall erupted in hush-hush crisis mode. With local elections looming and public trust in law enforcement already under scrutiny, the mayor's communications team scrambled to learn details. They prepared to handle potential backlash if the story leaked to the press. Meanwhile, the NYPD top brass braced for potential discipline issues. Had Wendy Holcroft displayed racist behavior or simply lost her temper? Within hours, Judge Althea Warren's office was inundated with calls. Journalists sniffed out the story requesting official comments. The judge herself maintained a dignified silence, focusing on the immediate tasks of her docket. Yet inside Althea felt a swirl of emotions, disappointment, anger, and a sense of personal affront. Over her years in the legal system, she'd encountered subtle forms of bias, but rarely had it been so blatant and in her own courtroom. In a private conversation, her longtime mentor, retired Judge Elaine Winters, phoned to offer support. "Althea, you mustn't let this slide," the elder judge said firmly. "This officer's behavior sets a dangerous precedent if it's not addressed. File a formal complaint. The system must see that prejudice in the ranks is unacceptable." Althea was torn. Part of her wanted to address it quietly. She disliked sensationalizing incidents that could further erode public trust. But she recognized that letting it go unchallenged could embolden those who shared Wendy Holcroft's mindset. Ultimately, Judge Warren composed a letter to the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau, describing the incident factually and requesting a review of the officer's conduct. Meanwhile, from her vantage point, Wendy Holcroft tried to downplay what had happened. She told her friend, Officer Regina Marks, that it was all overblown. "I just got frustrated," Wendy insisted. It had nothing to do with her being a black judge, but Regina noticed the anxious glint in Wendy's eyes. They both sensed the wave of repercussions forming on the horizon. As the day ended, rumors soared. Some speculated Wendy might face contempt of court or a departmental hearing. Others whispered that the entire police force was on high alert. Tensions between the bench and law enforcement, fragile at the best of times, threatened to flare. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and the city was about to witness a drama that would test allegiances, reputations, and the very notion of justice. Within the 14th Precinct squad room, everything felt heavier in the aftermath of Wendy Holcroft's courtroom outburst. Officers typed up reports, answered calls, and tried to focus on routine tasks, but the tense silence spoke volumes. Everyone had heard rumors an officer was facing potential discipline after insulting a black judge. Most knew it was Wendy, though not everyone dared mention it to her face. Captain Roberto Fulton, a tall, broad man with 25 years of service under his belt, summoned Wendy to his office. The blinds were drawn, adding an air of somber privacy. She arrived doing her best to wear a stoic expression. "Close the door." "Officer Holcroft," the captain said, voice low. He motioned for her to sit. Wendy complied, folding her arms. Captain Fulton fixed her with a stern gaze. "I got a call from the brass. They're investigating a complaint from Judge Warren's office about your conduct. Internal Affairs wants an interview with you next week." Wendy forced calm. "Yes, sir. It's been blown out of proportion. The judge and I had a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Fulton echoed, flipping through papers. "Listen carefully. This judge has respect citywide. And the mayor's office is all over this. If the complaint states you used racial language or disrespected the court, that's serious. You could be suspended or worse." She tried to defend herself. "Captain, I never used a slur. I just got frustrated with that defense attorney." "Which is precisely your problem," Fulton interjected sharply. "I don't care who was testifying. You do not cross the line in front of a judge. And if there's even a hint of racial bias, it's a PR nightmare for the department." He sighed, adding quietly, "You've always been a bit edgy, Holcroft. Tread carefully or you'll find yourself hung out to dry." Resentment sparked in Wendy's eyes, but she nodded. "Understood," she murmured, though inside she seethed at being scolded. She left the office feeling cornered, anger smoldering beneath the surface. Why is everyone so quick to side with that judge? Later, she tried venting to her closest friend on the force, Regina Marks, but their conversation took a tense turn. Regina, a black officer, was torn between loyalty to her friend and her own moral compass. "Wendy, if you used words like 'you people' in the middle of a hearing." "That's a problem," Regina said quietly. "I'm your friend, but you gotta see how messed up that looks." Wendy bristled. "Reg, you know I'm not racist. It was a slip of the tongue. This is just politics." But Regina's troubled expression spoke volumes. She didn't push further yet. Their bond felt strained. As the precinct lights dimmed that evening, Wendy realized she was increasingly isolated. Her colleagues distanced themselves, not wanting to get entangled in her controversy. It seemed that every word she'd uttered in that courtroom was splintering friendships and fueling new animosities. And the storm had only just begun. In the days after the incident, the corridors of the Midtown Justice Complex rang with half-whispered conversations about the Holcroft fiasco. Lawyers paused at water coolers to exchange updates. Some were outraged by Wendy's disrespectful remark and body language toward the bench. Others remained uncertain, cautioning that one moment in court might not reflect an entire person's character. But no one denied that the conflict threatened to escalate. Judge Althea Warren faced her own share of dilemmas. She'd filed a formal complaint, but that opened the door for potential cross-examination by internal affairs, who might dig into every detail of that hearing and her own background. While she had nothing to hide, she knew how cynically the system could twist narratives. The weight of representing minority communities of fighting for justice weighed heavily on her. This case risked overshadowing her larger mission. Meanwhile, a high-profile civil rights attorney named Victoria Dubois took an interest in the matter. Dubois had championed numerous cases of police misconduct across the city, some successful, some not. She publicly commended Judge Warren for speaking out. In a press release, Dubois said, "We stand with Judge Warren in condemning any form of racist or contemptuous behavior in our judicial system. No one, not even law enforcement, is above accountability." That statement went viral across local news channels and social media. Wendy Holcroft's name popped up in half the headlines. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from acquaintances, some urging her to apologize, others telling her to stand her ground. She felt corners of her life caving in, the once stable foundation of her career suddenly quaking, complicating matters. An upcoming union meeting for NYPD officers promised to address the Holcroft affair. The police union had historically defended officers fiercely against allegations of misconduct. But in this climate, where the mayor's office wanted to be seen as tough on racism, Wendy wasn't guaranteed unconditional support. She dreaded the possibility that her superiors might sacrifice her to appease public outrage. Late one evening, as Wendy sat at home in her cramped Queens apartment, she flipped channels, stumbling on a local news panel discussing cops versus courts, a brewing tension. A commentator speculated about her case, calling it a test of the city's vow for racial harmony. Wendy clenched her jaw, feeling an unfamiliar swirl of shame and anger. "I'm not a racist." She repeated it in her mind almost as a mantra. Yet the deeper truth was that her resentment against Judge Warren wasn't just about that single hearing. It had built over time from the biases she'd imbibed since childhood. She refused to see it plainly, but each day the fire of controversy burned brighter, threatening to lay bare the prejudice she had so often cloaked in professional frustration. The next steps would determine whether that fire consumed her career or offered her a path toward reckoning and change. On a crisp Wednesday morning, the city awoke to front-page headlines from the New York Daily News officer's contempt for Black Judge Sparks' investigation. The feature included quotes from courthouse staff who witnessed Wendy Holcroft's scornful eye roll. Though the piece stopped short of declaring Wendy a confirmed racist, the undertone was scathing. This officer embodied the problem of disrespect toward minority judges, it implied. Mayor Eric Adams, eager to maintain public trust, released a brief statement. "All city employees, including law enforcement officers, must uphold respect for our judiciary. We are monitoring the situation closely." The mention of respect for our judiciary was a subtle but clear signal that Wendy's actions had seriously rattled City Hall. At the 14th precinct, cameras and reporters began camping outside. They aimed for glimpses of Wendy, hoping for a comment or a meltdown on camera. Department spokespeople deflected questions, citing an ongoing internal affairs inquiry. Inside, Wendy avoided the main entrances, sneaking through side doors to dodge the press. She felt eyes track her wherever she went. Colleagues who once greeted her with casual banter now kept their distance or offered polite nods at best. A mandatory meeting was called by the precinct's public affairs liaison sergeant Gillian Barnes, who reminded everyone about the department's media guidelines. No unauthorized statements. Refer all inquiries to the press office. While nobody named Wendy directly, the tension in the briefing room said it all. At the same time, Judge Althea Warren navigated her own flurry of attention. On top of her usual caseload, she received emails of support from fellow judges, civil rights groups, and even private citizens who heard of her predicament. Some messages carried deep gratitude. Thank you for standing up to systemic disrespect. Others were laced with hate, telling her to go easy on cops or slinging vile racial slurs. She reported the threatening ones to courthouse security, who took them seriously. It reminded her that the path to equity was fraught with danger and relentless bigotry. Despite the chaos, Althea kept her composure in the courtroom. She never mentioned Wendy Holcroft's name, focusing solely on the day's proceedings. Yet behind closed doors, she wrestled with a swirl of emotions, offense, sadness, and the burden of possibly becoming a symbol. She had no desire to be a poster child for anti-racism. She merely wanted to do her job with dignity. In this spotlight, both women found themselves tested in ways they never anticipated. Wendy tried to cling to her version of events, insisting the entire fiasco was an overreaction. Althea, meanwhile, steeled her resolve, reminding herself that justice demanded truth, no matter how uncomfortable. As the city's glare intensified, the stage was set for a showdown. Neither side could simply walk away from. As public scrutiny mounted, pressure weighed heavily on Wendy Holcroft. She found herself second-guessing routine decisions, worried that even the slightest misstep could incite further criticism. Her once confident swagger gave way to wariness. She even hesitated to conduct traffic stops unless absolutely necessary, fearing someone might film her or misinterpret her actions. Rumors circulated that she might be placed on desk duty pending the internal affairs outcome. A glimmer of potential redemption emerged when an unexpected figure reached out. Father Marcus Reeves, a chaplain affiliated with the NYPD. He had counseled many officers grappling with stress or moral dilemmas. He quietly invited Wendy to a conversation. Reluctantly, she accepted meeting him in a small chapel near the precinct, an old stone building with stained glass windows. She arrived in plain clothes, hoping to avoid attention. Sitting on a worn pew, Wendy fidgeted, glancing at the swirling colors of the stained glass. Father Reeves joined her, quiet but welcoming. Officer Holcroft, I'm not here to judge you, but I've seen how a single moment can unravel someone's career and their sense of self. He paused gently. Tell me your side. Without her usual bluster, Wendy explained how she felt cornered in court, how the defense attorney was grilling her. She insisted the "you people" remark was misunderstood. I was talking about defense lawyers, not the judge's race, she claimed. But her own voice faltered, as though she couldn't fully convince herself. Father Reeves listened intently. Then he posed a soft but penetrating question. Why do you think others believe your remark was racially charged? Wendy stiffened. She wanted to protest, but the words jammed in her throat. She could hardly articulate how her deep-seated biases had shaped that moment. Instead, she shook her head. They're painting me as a villain. Reeves leaned forward, voice calm. People are reacting to something bigger than a single phrase. Sometimes a small slip can reveal deeper feelings. If you truly want to move forward, consider searching your heart. Ask if you've allowed prejudices to take root. He left her with that thought standing to go. Alone. Wendy stared at the flickers of colored light dancing on the chapel floor. Part of her seethed at the idea she might actually hold racist beliefs. Another part, one she rarely acknowledged, felt a pang of guilt. She recalled fleeting memories of her father's bitter rants, the times she'd made off-hand remarks about certain suspects or neighborhoods. She couldn't deny that her perspective had always been skewed, but was she willing to face that truth? Time would tell. For now, Wendy left the chapel feeling unsettled. She was beginning to grasp that the road to redemption, if she sought it, would require confronting some uncomfortable truths. And with the internal affairs interview looming, the clock on her professional future was ticking faster than ever. While Officer Wendy Holcroft wrestled with the possibility of personal change, Judge Althea Warren found renewed purpose in her community engagement. Already known for volunteering at youth mentorship programs, Althea stepped up her involvement, determined to combat the negativity swirling around the city. She believed that bridging the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities required more than punishment and finger-pointing. It required genuine dialogue. One Saturday, the courthouse hosted a public community and justice day, inviting residents to meet judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys in an informal setting. Tables lined a spacious hall, each featuring a department or service. Althea, in casual attire, spent hours conversing with families, answering questions about how bail worked or why trials sometimes took so long. She also listened to personal stories, many involving negative experiences with the police. She took note of each offering both understanding and practical guidance. Meanwhile, Wendy Holcroft, ironically, had also been assigned to attend the event, though she dreaded it. Her shift partner fell ill, leaving Wendy to staff the precinct's booth alone. She arrived wearing her uniform, eyes scanning the crowd for signs of hostility. She tried to maintain a polite smile as people approached. Some shook her hand, curious about police procedures. Others eyed her warily, recalling the news coverage. She overheard more than one snide comment about that racist cop. Midday, as Wendy leafed through pamphlets, she spotted Judge Warren across the hall, engaged in lively conversation with a group of teenagers. The judge's warm laughter floated over the din. There was an undeniable grace in the way she connected with people, no condescension or pomp. Wendy felt an odd pang of envy and guilt. At one point, their gazes met across the hall. Althea inclined her head politely, acknowledging Wendy's presence, but not seeking further interaction. Wendy's stomach clenched. She turned away, focusing on a woman who approached to ask about local crime stats. But she couldn't shake the sense of displacement, as if she was the only one in uniform who felt like an outsider. Later, when the event wrapped up, Althea quietly slipped outside to the courtyard, seeking a moment of fresh air before heading home. Unexpectedly, she found Wendy there too, leaning against a stone pillar, arms crossed. The tension was palpable. The judge considered whether to speak, eventually taking a measured step closer. Officer Holcroft, Althea said softly, "I hope you found today's event worthwhile." Wendy struggled to maintain composure. She forced out a polite reply. "Yes, Your Honor. Good turnout." An awkward silence lingered. Althea looked at Wendy, her expression not unkind, but guarded. "I'll leave you to it." "Take care," she offered, stepping away. Wendy swallowed a lump in her throat, watching the judge depart. Though brief, the exchange underscored a reality neither could ignore. They stood on opposite sides of a fractured relationship between the bench and the badge, and if there was any hope for reconciliation, both personally and systemically, each woman would have to confront the prejudice, hurt, and stubborn pride that divided them. The day of the internal affairs hearing arrived under a chilly morning sky. Officer Wendy Holcroft strode into the IAB offices, dressed in plain clothes, escorted by her union representative, a gruff man named Hank Castellano. Cameras flashing outside captured her tense expression as local news stations continued to track the racist cop vs. black judge storyline. Wendy felt a sting of humiliation, but kept her chin high. Inside a nondescript conference room, a panel of 3 IAB investigators waited. They introduced themselves curtly: Lieutenant Megan Lee, Sergeant Aaron Phelps, and Detective Carla Munoz. Their job was to pass the details of Wendy's alleged misconduct, deciding if departmental disciplinary charges were warranted. They had sworn statements from Judge Althea Warren, from multiple witnesses in the courtroom that day, and from Wendy herself. The hearing commenced with a formal reading of the complaint. The gist: Wendy Holcroft had displayed disrespect toward a judge and used language perceived as racially charged, potentially violating departmental rules and tarnishing the NYPD's reputation. Wendy's lawyer promptly objected to the characterization of racially charged, insisting there was no definitive proof she referenced race. Next came testimony. Courtroom staff recounted the eye roll the Yayu people phrase and the context in which it was said. The defense attorney who'd been questioning Wendy described the officer's tone as hostile, near contempt. He recalled how she overshadowed Miles Hendricks, a minor, treating him as if he were a hardened criminal. The public defender also gave an impassioned statement, saying, "If this is how she acts in front of a judge, imagine how she behaves on the streets." Wendy listened with mounting dread. Each account chipped away at her defense. She insisted she never singled out race that you people referred to lawyers. She apologized for rolling her eyes, calling it a frustrated reflex. She pivoted blame, suggesting the defense attorney had taunted her. "I'm only human," she said. "I made a mistake in body language, not in ethics." At that point, the panel introduced a surprise piece of evidence audio from the courtroom's archival recording. On playback, Wendy's irritated voice rang clearly. Her remark: "You people always try to twist." The facts resonated in an environment where the judge, the defense attorney, and even the defendant were black. The hush that followed in the recording was deafening. Lieutenant Lee paused the tape. "Officer Holcroft," she asked, "can you understand how your words might be interpreted as directed at their race, not their profession?" Wendy hesitated, face hot. "I see how it might be misread," she admitted quietly, a tremor in her voice. "But that wasn't my intent." Sergeant Phelps cleared his throat. "Intent matters less than impact, officer." "And your subsequent eye roll at the presiding judge, do you deny it was a sign of disrespect?" Wendy swallowed hard. "I was frustrated," she managed. The hearing pressed on, methodically dissecting every angle. By the end of the day, Wendy felt drained, uncertain whether the panel believed her disclaimers. The official verdict wouldn't come immediately, yet from their unyielding questions, she sensed her career teetered on the brink of an abyss. Please, she thought, don't let them fire me for one moment of anger. But deep down, she couldn't quell the nagging sense that this was more than just a single moment, that her entire worldview was under scrutiny. As Wendy Holcroft endured the glare of internal affairs, Judge Althea Warren also prepared for a potential civil suit. Civil rights attorney Victoria Dubois had contacted Miles Hendricks's family, suggesting they might have grounds to sue the city, and Wendy personally for violating Miles's rights. The family was hesitant lawsuits could be lengthy and expensive, but encouraged by advocates, they decided to explore it. Privately, Miles's mother, Patrice Hendricks, reached out to Judge Warren for advice. Although Althea couldn't offer legal counsel due to her role, she empathized. "I wish you the best in seeking justice," the judge said gently. She referred them to a pro bono program that might assist. From her vantage point, Althea recognized that this conflict was ballooning into a citywide conversation about policing judicial respect and race relations. While she hadn't intended to become a figurehead, the momentum was out of her control. Back at the 14th precinct, Wendy's personal facade began to crack more openly. Former supporters turned wary, worried the department might want to make an example of her. Regina Marks. Her friend still listened but was more guarded. "Wendy, maybe you need to reflect on why you used that phrase," Regina said one afternoon. "Sometimes the simplest words carry coded meanings we don't even realize." Wendy bristled. "I told you, Reg, I never intended it that way." But the half-heartedness in her denial was obvious. The truth gnawed at her. She started having trouble sleeping, haunted by nightmares of losing her job, of people calling her a bigot on the streets. In fleeting moments, she admitted to herself that her father's toxic worldview had shaped her more than she'd ever acknowledged. Perhaps she had harbored a silent disregard for people of color in positions of power, especially in the judiciary. An unexpected lifeline came from Father Marcus Reeves again, who called her to suggest a new perspective. He introduced Wendy to a community workshop focusing on bridging gaps between law enforcement and minority communities. It was a small group session held at a local YMCA, where participants spoke openly about experiences with racism and police bias. Initially, Wendy balked why subject herself to potential hostility, but an unexplainable pull led her to accept. One brisk evening, Wendy sat in a circle of 10 people, local residents, a few cops, a teacher, and a retired social worker. They shared personal stories of fear, mistrust, and prejudice. Wendy listened with arms folded, at first defensive. Then a young black man recounted being stopped and frisked 6 times in 1 month, purely because he fit a description. The anguish in his voice made Wendy's stomach clench. She realized that her standard policing approach might have contributed to similar experiences for others. Tears pricked her eyes when she spoke. Haltingly, she confessed feeling demonized by the public, yet also uncertain if she was deep down harboring racist sentiments. The group didn't condemn her outright. Instead, they offered an opening for honest self-reflection. By the session's end, Wendy left feeling shaken, but strangely lighter. Could I have been wrong? She wondered, the question echoing in her mind. The cracks in her facade widened, letting in faint glimmers of empathy and accountability. The following week brought the conclusion of the internal affairs inquiry. Tension at the 14th precinct was palpable. Everyone knew Officer Wendy Holcroft's fate would be a bellwether for how strictly the department addressed allegations of racial bias. The hearing reconvened in a subdued conference room, the same panel of investigators presiding. Wendy arrived with her union rep heart pounding. She clutched a folder containing character references from a couple of colleagues and an older mentor from the academy. She'd also prepared a statement of contrition, albeit one that still stopped short of admitting racism. She sat stiffly, waiting for them to begin. Lieutenant Lee announced their findings. Wendy's language in court and subsequent demeanor had been disrespectful to a presiding judge. This misconduct violated the NYPD's code of conduct. Additionally, while they wouldn't label her officially as racist, the context strongly suggested an underlying bias that had no place in policing. The panel recommended a 3-month suspension without pay and mandatory cultural sensitivity training. Failure to complete the training or further misconduct would result in immediate termination. Wendy swallowed relief mingling with dread. A suspension was severe. It tarnished her record, cost her wages, and might hamper promotions. But it wasn't permanent dismissal. She had dreaded the possibility of losing her badge altogether. She forced out a shaky thank you when asked if she understood. The panel concluded the session documenting their decision for final departmental review. Simultaneously, Judge Althea Warren was informed of the outcome. She received the news with measured acceptance. The punishment was not as harsh as some activists might have desired, but it carried weight. Wendy would face consequences that could reshape her approach to law enforcement. Althea hoped, perhaps naively, that it might also spark introspection in Wendy's heart. City Hall weighed in, issuing a statement through the mayor's office. "We support the NYPD's disciplinary measures. All public servants must be held to high standards. We continue to encourage reforms that foster mutual respect between police and the judiciary." The statement, though brief, reinforced that Wendy's misstep wasn't being swept under the rug. The immediate question was how Wendy would handle her suspension. She could challenge it through the union's grievance process, or she could accept the discipline. Some corners of the police union pushed her to appeal, viewing the punishment as caving to political correctness. But Wendy, feeling exhaustion deep in her bones, hesitated. Another drawn-out fight seemed suffocating. 3 days later, she walked alone into the 14th precinct, turned in her service weapon and badge for safekeeping, and began her suspension. The atmosphere was funereal as she said quiet goodbyes to a few colleagues. Regina Marks offered a brief hug, whispering, "Take this time to figure things out, Wendy. I'll be here if you need me." Outside, the crisp autumn air hit Wendy's face like a slap. She realized she had no plan for the next 3 months. No job, no daily routine to distract her from the complicated mess swirling in her mind. The final judgment had come, and though her career wasn't officially over, it had been irrevocably scarred. Now she faced the unfamiliar challenge of either confronting her biases head-on or letting them fester until they destroyed whatever remained of her sense of self. In the weeks following Wendy Holcroft's suspension, life in the city churned on. The incident faded from front-page headlines, replaced by the latest political squabbles and economic news. But for those involved, the repercussions lingered. Judge Althea Warren continued her docket, presiding over a mix of criminal and civil cases. Her name still carried a distinct hush whenever she entered a room, as people remembered the stand she had taken. Althea herself, though maintaining her composure, felt the emotional toll of the ordeal. During quiet moments in her chambers, she grappled with conflicting emotions: relief that justice was served, sorrow that such ignorance persisted in the system. She found solace in small triumphs, like seeing young defendants turn their lives around or forging strong connections at community forums. Meanwhile, the civil rights attorney, Victoria Dubois, proceeded with a potential lawsuit on behalf of Miles Hendricks, alleging that the NYPD, through Officer Holcroft, had discriminated against him. Whether the claim would reach court remained unclear, but settlement talks began in the background. The city's attorneys recognized the negative optics of a trial. Miles and his family hoped for not just compensation, but also policy changes that might prevent future abuses. As for Wendy, she spent her suspension battling a swirl of guilt, resentment, and introspection. At times, she clung to a defensive narrative: I was scapegoated. Other times, she recalled the heartfelt stories from that bridging workshop Father Reeves had introduced her to, moments that cracked open her chest with realization. She started reading books about systemic racism and policing. Some recommended by Regina, or even Father Reeves. It was an uncomfortable journey, confronting her father's influence and her own blind spots. Some nights, she wept with a mix of shame and relief. Hard karma arrived in the form of shattered illusions. Wendy had believed the badge shielded her from consequences. She'd prided herself on being a strong enforcer of the law. Now she was reduced to a suspended officer, wages slashed, forced to reevaluate her sense of identity. The calls from the union had dwindled her so-called friends at the bar near Lexington, vanished, leaving her alone with the bitter reality that she was expendable when scandal struck. Despite the blow to her pride, a faint ember of hope glowed. Perhaps with enough honesty and effort, Wendy could re-emerge from suspension a better person and a better cop. Or maybe she'd find another path entirely. She had no illusions it would be easy. Bigotry, especially the kind soaked up in childhood, didn't vanish overnight. But the seeds of change had been planted. On a frosty morning, Wendy mustered courage and showed up unannounced at the community workshop. Familiar faces residents, a few off-duty officers greeted her with cautious acceptance. There, in raw conversations, she started to peel back layers of her prejudice. She spoke less, listened more. She found herself re-evaluating her father's tirades, her own belief that some neighborhoods were inherently criminal. In the process, she formed genuine connections with people she once dismissed as others. Meanwhile, Judge Warren, unaware of Wendy's quiet transformation, focused on her judicial duties. She saw the city's complexities daily, the interplay of poverty, race, and justice. If she ever glimpsed the seeds of redemption in the suspended officer, she might have offered a nod of encouragement. For now, though, their worlds no longer collided in the stark glare of a courtroom. The final outcome rested on Wendy's willingness to follow through, to accept the harsh lessons taught by her one moment of anger and the subsequent chain of events it unleashed. Only time would reveal whether Wendy Holcroft's forced humility could bloom into empathy, and whether the city and the system that held them all would be changed by the aftershocks of that single day in court. For now, each woman walked her own path, forging ahead in a city that seldom paused to reflect, but always demanded accountability in ways that could not be ignored. Standing at the crossroads of conscience and consequence, Officer Wendy Holcroft discovered that a single act of disrespect could unravel everything she thought she knew about justice, about race, and about herself. Judge Althea Warren, in turn, demonstrated that power wielded with integrity and fairness can expose hidden truths and compel deep self-reflection. Their clash didn't just rattle a courtroom. It galvanized a broader push to confront bias within law enforcement and the judicial system. If you were captivated by this dramatic journey of prejudice, public scrutiny, and unexpected self-transformation, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support enables us to bring you more intense, thought-provoking fiction drawn from real-life social tensions. Stay tuned as we explore stories that uncover the power of empathy, accountability, and resilience, reminding us that even the darkest conflicts can spark a path toward hope and reform. Thank you for watching.